uh, talk about this chapter 20. See, this chapter 20, it's titled Death, Desire, and Incapacity. But one should note that it's placed between chapter 19, which is life, and then chapter 21, which is the ascent of life. So let's find out why he has placed this death, desire, and incapacity between these two chapters. Before that, we should understand what is life, because whatever Shri Aurobindo says, it's radically different from whatever we know. So life means what we think is that life means breathing, eating, and movement. This is what we think as life. But what Shri Aurobindo says is that life manifests upon the earth with matter as its basis. Number one. Number two, it is essentially a form of cosmic energy and its dynamic movement. So life means, what Shri Aurobindo says is, it's a cosmic energy and it's a dynamic movement. But what we think as life is something which is between, something which exists before death. That's what we think. And we make an opposition between the death and life. That there need not be an opposition. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. The life, what happened? Life is a process by which it's an unceasing process. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. It's an unceasing process of disintegration and renewal of the substance. Life maintains the forms. So there is no need for making an opposition between the death and life. It is what Shri Aurobindo says that is an error of our mentality. Secondly, what he says, this death means there is a disintegration of substance, and in the process of life, there is disintegration of substance and its renewal, maintenance, and change of form. These are all constant process of life. What he says is that even in the death, only the material of one form is broken up to serve as material for other forms of life. So what he says is there is one all-pervading life, which is imperishable and eternal. This is contrary to our view. What we view as life is something which is not a permanent feature. But what Shri Aurobindo says is life is imperishable and eternal. And we don't consider life as a force which creates, maintains, and destroys forms. See, normally our perception of life is different. What we perceive as life is only a particular result of the life, result of the universal force, which is life. Life is really a force which creates, maintains, and destroys forms, but we don't consider it so. What we consider as life is a result of the universal force, with which we are familiar. Of course, it manifests itself in the animal, in the plant. Those things we consider as life. But life is also there in metal, stone, and gas, because the energy, the force is there involved in matter also. But we don't consider it as life. So wherever we find movement, wherever we find breathing, eating, feeling, desires, we think that there is life, but what Shri Aurobindo says is that there are only process of life and not life itself. So this thing we should be very clear about it. This is something different. Secondly, what he says is that there is a constant dynamic energy in movement in the universe. Constant dynamic energy in movement in the universe. And in each physical body or object, plant or animal or metal, the same dynamic force is stored and active. So you take anything, that force is stored and active. There is an energy in movement in the universe. There is an energy stored in each unit, and it is active. What happens is that there is an interchange of these two forces, which gives us a phenomena which we associate with the idea of life. So this is something Shri Aurobindo says about life. There is an interchange of forces between what is contained and what is in the universe that gives idea of life. And this is the action which we recognize as action of life energy. See, this interchange of life force takes place between different forms it has built, because this force, this consciousness force which builds life forms, there is an interchange of life force between different forms it has built up. So each form constantly takes into itself and gives out again the breath and energy of the common force and nourishes itself with it by various means. This is what happening between two life forms. So what Shri Aurobindo finally says in this previous chapter, that is, life is that life is essentially the same everywhere, from atom to man. So it's not that life exists only in plants, animals, and human beings. It's not so. Life is essential, because life is a force. Life is essentially the same everywhere from atom to man. It's a universal operation of conscious force in 3 stages, he says. We should know what are the 3 stages are. First stage, there is a vibration of consciousness. That force is there. It is asleep in matter. It's in a very dormant stage in matter. And it's totally subconscious and wholly mechanical. This is the initial stage. Second stage, what happens is that it's a middle stage. The vibration becomes capable of a response, but still it is submental. That is what we find in the plants. What he says, it's in the verge of consciousness. The highest is that in which life develops conscious mentality. That's where we are placed. But it's only the third stage. The fourth stage is that we'll go beyond this mental stage, and then we will reach the supramental. So this is what he talks about life. So in chapter 19, he makes a very clear description of what is life. Unless we understand what is life, then we can't understand what is death, which is a subsequent chapter. Secondly, this subsequent chapter, death, desire, and incapacity, where it comes in the life, in what stage it comes in the life, that one should know. For that, we should go to the next chapter. I'll just briefly touch upon what he states in the next chapter. Then we'll go to the chapter 20, that is the death, desire, and incapacity. You see, this next chapter is 21, the ascent of life. He says the life has different stages. As we say, there is a conscious force, that is a common thing. It first involves, it descends into the matter. So the first stage is a material form. In that stage, you find division. There is atomic division. Division is a prominent feature in the first stage. Then life emerges from the matter. Matter is the first stage, then life emerges from the matter. It doesn't stop there. What happens is there is a emergence of conscious mind from life. So mind emerges from life. When the moment the mind emerges from life, there is a new set of balance of forces introduced in the realm of matter. Till the mind comes to the scene, it's all the dominance of matter. But the moment the mind comes to the scene, there is a new set of balance of forces which is introduced in the realm of matter. Okay, this is what Shri Aurobindo says. But what he says is that the life, the source of the life is a conscious force. See, Shri Aurobindo's life divine is built upon the basic premise that there is nothing in this universe which is not Satchidananda. That is Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. Everything you find in the universe will ultimately resolve itself into Satchidananda. Everything you find. If it's matter, it will ultimately resolve into Satchidananda. If it is life, ultimately it will resolve into Satchidananda. If it is mind, it will ultimately resolve itself into Satchidananda. So what he says, life as such, it's now separated from its source, that is consciousness force, Chit Sakti. And life is a movement, there is an ascent of life. There is an evolutionary movement taking place in the life. We are in the middle stage, we are in transition. Till the life becomes one with its source, that is its consciousness force, death, desire, and incapacity form the intermediary status of evolution of life. So this is why the Shri Aurobindo has placed the chapter 19 in between this chapter, of course, this life and the ascent of life. Till life becomes one with its source, the consciousness force, death, desire, and incapacity form the intermediary status of evolution of life. And he gives a new interpretation to Darwinian theory. See, Shri Aurobindo gives a radical interpretation to Darwinian theory. See, what he says, well, wherever we think of Darwinian theory, we think there is a struggle, survival of the fittest, forms perish, all these things we have learnt. But what he says is that this Darwinian theory deals with this intermediary status only. That is his death, desire, incapacity. The life doesn't stop with that. But Darwinian theory stops with that only. And what he says is that, what Shri Aurobindo says is that through death, life tempts its own positive being to seek immortality. So death is a positive factor. Through death, life tempts its own positive being to seek immortality. Similarly, hunger and desire involve a struggle towards attaining satisfaction and security. These are all intermediary moments, but there is a purpose behind it. Hunger and desire involve a struggle towards attaining satisfaction and security. Again, desire is a stimulus by which life tempts its own positive being to attain the delight of existence by full possession. You see, the desire as of now, it is of vital origin, yes, but it is prompted. Why it is why it is prompted? No, it is prompted by the desire to attain the ultimate delight. So it is an intermediary moment, but ultimate aim is to attain the delight of existence by full possession. Limitation and defect, they are the negations. What we call incapacity, limitation and defect are the negations by which life tempts its own positive being to seek for perfection for which it is eternally capable. So these are all intermediary factors which is going to serve an ulterior motive, ulterior purpose, which is something beyond it. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. And what he says is that the Darwinian theory seeks to explain the evolution in terms of mechanical principle only. It deals with the mechanical consciousness conceived in matter. It fails to see a new principle, mind has entered in the realm of life. This is where Darwinian theory lacks. That's why it's concentrated only on aggressive principle of life. This is what Shri Aurobindo says. And in the ascent of life, he states four states. First state is a material form matter. Second stage is that life principle vitality. Third stage is that there is, of course, life comes, and then there are all individual forms are there, and there is an emergence of mind. With the emergence of mind, what happens is that when the emergence of mind, as long as life is there in the primitive forms, there is the process of one destroying the other, and then the survival of the fittest. But the moment the mind comes into the scene, what Shri Aurobindo says is that there is a need for mutual association with other individuals. And love will be the dominant factor. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. And its peak emergence is the governing principle of the development into the third status. Third status is a mind. First status is a matter. Second status is a life. And third stages is when there is a development of mind. In the ascent of life, these are all third status, three stages. And in the third stage, there is a principle of mind where the love will be the dominant factor, he says. And he gives a new definition for the fittest of survival. What Darwinian theory says is that fittest for survival means whichever is strong will ultimately survive by eliminating the other. But what Shri Aurobindo says is that when mind becomes a dominant principle, the fittest for survival will be those individuals and groups who develop most the law of association and law of love. So when mind comes to play a dominant role, the law of association and law of love, they come to play a prominent role. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. So, but what he says is that in the ascent of life, the life will not end with the mind, because what he says is that the perfect solution to the problem of life cannot be reached by association, interchange, accommodation of love alone, or by mind alone, or by heart alone. So there must be a fourth status, that is a supramental. That fourth status of life, definitely the entire human race is moving towards that. By reaching the fourth status, naturally we will reach a sense of fulfillment. And there will be a unity and freedom of spirit. This is what the ascent of life, he says. So the life is the definition of life is what is life, he has stated in the chapter 19. Chapter 21, he has stated that in the ascent of life, there is an intermediary status where death comes, desire comes, incapacity comes, but it will not stop. It will reach the ultimate status of supermind. So now coming to the chapter, this is 20. He has dwelt at length about death, desire, and capacity. First, we should know what is life. See, this life, as we have already seen, it's a universal force. What is life? It's a universal force. Why life works, how it works, It works to create, energize, maintain, and modify substantial forms. And what it does is that it dissolves form and reconstructs them. This is what life does. Life dissolves forms and reconstructs them. And it does this work with a mutual play and interchange of an apparently and secretly conscious energy as its fundamental character. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. There is a mutual play. There is an interchange of an apparently or secretly conscious energy. There is a conscious energy involved in each form. There is a mutual, there are like different, even though there are different life forms, there is a mutual play and interchange. And what is the evolutionary principle behind life is that we have already seen. Number 4, first comes the matter, then life manifests out of matter, then life delivers out of itself the mind, then it will not stop. The mind will deliver out of itself the supermind. This is what the evolutionary principle behind the life. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. Then, what mind and life we are saying? This mind and life are creations of what? What Shri Aurobindo says is that mind and life are the creations of consciousness force and the knowledge will. This consciousness force is a chit sakti of Sachidananda. So we have already seen whatever we find in this universe is nothing but the manifestation of Sachidananda. So mind and life are the creations of consciousness force and the knowledge will, he says. This knowledge will is a word Shri Aurobindo uses very often. It means knowledge, it's a hyphenated word, knowledge hyphen will. There is knowledge as will. There is no, here, there is no difference between, knowledge and will. The knowledge which is at once the will, that's what he means. This knowledge will, which is which is placed in the supermind. The supermind has this knowledge will, because the supermind is the creator of the universe. Sachidananda is Sachidananda manifests itself in the universe, but Sachidananda is an infinite aspect. It can't directly manifest into finite forms, so it requires an intermediary principle, that supermind. The supermind, what happens is that it has it has what is called this knowledge will. Knowledge will is, it has knowledge as to how to create this universe, and it has a force. So this mind and life are the creations of consciousness force and the knowledge will. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. And this force operates for what? It operates for maintenance of clearly demarcated individual forms. So we find clearly demarcated individual forms. There is a mutual opposition and interchange, which we have already seen. But even though they are seen separate, but they are never separate, because there is always a unity. The division is what we find as division in this universe is only apparent. There is always an underlying unity behind this division. And life is a final operation by which the force of consciousness, conscious being, maintains, energizes, constitutes, and reconstitutes individual forms. So life is a final operation, because when the Chit Sakti, consciousness force, manifests itself, life becomes final operations by which individual forms are created, maintained, energized. But life, we find, it is always subject to limitation and ignorance. Why life is ignorant and subject to limitation? This is a question we ask ourselves. You know that our mind is a parent of ignorance. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. Why mind is ignorant? Because it is separated from the supermind. Supermind is a creator. When the creation manifestation happens, what happens? This lower forms of body, mind, and life, they are separated from the source. Mind is separated from the supermind. Similarly, life is separated from its source. That is a consciousness force. That's why Shri Aurobindo says the life always remains unconscious in its darkened action, and it serves its operations blindly and ignorantly. Why life is ignorant? Because it's separated from its source, that is consciousness force. Secondly, the life is functioning under the darkened and dividing operation of mind. So this is something Shri Aurobindo says. The mind itself is ignorant. Under its influence, life is functioning. That's why its functioning is also darkened and divided. And because it's ignorant and divided, it undergoes subjection to death, limitation, weakness, suffering, and ignorant functioning. And this individual life, is it really the master of itself? It is not. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. It is not really this life force, it's individual life force. It's not really the master of itself. Because it is always in constant interchange with the cosmic force. It has to obey. This individual life has to subject itself to the force of the cosmic interchange, and it has to obey. That's why he says this individual life cannot be a master of itself. Unless the consciousness fully develops, it has to subject itself to the universal play. And he says the increasing impulse of all individual life. There is an increasing impulse of all individual life. There is an impulse is there in all individual life. That impulse, he says, is to realize its own power and to master as well as to know its world. Because life knows that life instinctively knows that its source is Sachidananda, consciousness force. So it aspires itself to be individually the master of its own world. This is the increasing impulse of all individual life that Shri Aurobindo says. So it wants to master as well as to know its world. This is a impulse of all individual life. Now we'll ask whether it is possible for the individual life to be the master of all force. Whether it is possible, we can ask. Shri Aurobindo says the life, as long as individual life remains a divided individual life, because it's divided from its source. The individual life in the individual form must always subject to death, desire, and incapacity. So, on one hand, life has an instinct, it has an increasing impulse to master the world. On the other hand, it's divided from its source, separated from its source, that is consciousness force. Shri Aurobindo says as long as the individual life remains a divided, individualized life and force, the individual life in the individual form must always be subject to death, desire, and incapacity. what Shri Aurobindo calls these three things as three badges of its limitation. Death, desire, and incapacity are the three badges of the limitation of life. So that's why the question of death, desire, and incapacity comes. Because the life is separate from its source, these three things affect the life. Not affect the life exactly, but what happens? Life has to undergo this process. Then, how death is imposed on individual life? We say the death, desire, and incapacity. How death is imposed on individual life? So, how death happens? There are see, Shri Aurobindo says, number one, death is imposed on individual life by the condition of its own existence, because each form has a body, each form has a life force in it. So, its own condition. Secondly, by its relation to the all force which manifests itself in the universe. There is always an interchange of individual life force with the universal life force. So there are two interchanges. Number one, within itself. Number two, with the universe. Because of this interchange, death is imposed in the individual life because of these two factors. Shri Aurobindo says there is a life energy in the body which has to support the attack of the energies external to it in the universe. There is an attack of energy because there is an interaction exchange. There is a attack of the energy. There is an attack of the energies external to it in the universe. Number one, it has to use those forces, universal energy. It has to draw upon them and sustain on them. At the same time, it is being consumed by them. So there are two things happening simultaneously. Number one, the individual life has to draw from the universal life and has to feed upon them. This is one thing. Second thing, at the same time, it is being consumed by them. So this is between the individual life and the universal life. In this process, whenever there is an imbalance, the death happens. And Shri Aurobindo quotes Upanishad statement, that is, the eater eating is himself eaten. Because the life in the body is constantly exposed to the possibility of being broken by the attack of life external to it. There is a consuming capacity and there is a capacity of being consumed. When there is no right balance between the capacity of consumption and the capacity of providing food for the life outside, if the balance gets disturbed, then death sets in, because the life is unable to renew itself, and therefore it has to go through the process of death for a new construction or renewal. This is one thing. Secondly, we may ask, what causes the disease and decay of the body? Again, from the Upanishad, Shri Aurobindo has quoted that the life force, because we have to body which in order to sustain itself, it uses the life force. At the same time, the body is the food of the life force. This is a mutual relation between the body and the life force. Life force is the food of the body. The body is the food of the life force. Life energy supplies the material by which the form is built up. And it maintains the body and renews the body. At the same time, what happens? The life energy is constantly using up the form. Number one, life energy supplies the material to the form by which our body is built. At the same time, the life energy constantly is using up the substantial form of itself, which it thus creates and keeps in existence. So on one hand, it supplies the energy to the body, at the same time, it eats up the body itself. The disease and decay set in, and the process of disintegration starts when the balance between the two operations is imperfect. So there are two operations. One is the life force supplying the material to the body. The other is the life force eating up the material from the body. When the balance between these two operations gets disturbed, then the process of disintegration starts. Because Shri Aurobindo says there is an increasing demand of the life energy on the form, and it always exceeds the original system of supply. This is an imbalance. There is always an imbalance. That's why it leads to many disorders and opposed to the harmony and the length of maintenance of life. At some stage, the life succumbs and death happens. That's why the mother says all illnesses are, the reason behind the illness is that there is a disharmony in the body. That's what mother says. You bring back the harmony, then the body is cured, the illness is cured. We may ask why life dissolves and renews the body. Why life dissolves and renews the body? See, life dissolves and renews the body. It is a process of life by which the individual body is dissolved and there is a renewal of the body. There is a reason for that. There is a spiritual reason for that. Now, first reason is that the life in the body, because the life knows that it is a part of the infinite. Even though it has assumed a finite form, it knows that its original status is infinite. It belongs to that Satchidananda Chit Sakti. So it always seeks the infinite experience on a finite basis. The life in the body seeks an infinite experience on a finite basis because the form, the very fact that it is imprisoned in an individual form limits the possibility of this infinite experience. Therefore, the only possibility is that it has to dissolve it and seek new forms. This is the first reason. Second reason is that the soul, which is within us, it has limited itself by concentrating on the moment and the field. Again, it is again driven to seek its infinity by the principle of succession. How the soul wants to attain infinity is by the principle of succession. It moves through successive fields, successive experiences or lives, successive accumulation of knowledge, capacity and enjoyment. This is how the soul aspires to seek infinity. This is not possible in a life contained in a single body. It's not possible. So to enable this process, change of form is essential. Naturally, death happens. So these are all the two reasons Shri Aurobindo says. Number one, life in the body seeks infinite experience on a finite basis. Number two, the soul, which has limited itself by concentrating on the moment in a body, is driven to seek its infinity again by the principle of succession. The succession can happen only by a change of form. So these are the two reasons why the body is dissolved and body is renewed. We may ask, why there is a necessity and justification of death. As we have seen already, there is a finite living substance which aspires for soul immortality through eternal change of form. This is one reason. Secondly, there is a finite mind involved in the living body which also aspires for soul infinity. It wants it wants an eternal change of experience through different life settings, through different experiences. And this change of form cannot remain merely a constant renewal of the same form type that exists between our birth and death. The mind, a finite mind involved in the living body, aspires for soul infinity through eternal change of experience. It wants new experiences, but eternal. To do so, this change of form cannot remain merely a constant renewal of the same type. The form cannot be a same type that exists between our birth and death. It cannot happen in a same form type. So what happens is that the experiencing mind has to be thrown into new forms in new consciousness of time, place, and environment. The mind wants to experience in new circumstances of time, place, and environment. So Shri Aurobindo says this is the necessity and justification of death, not as denial of life, but as a process of life. It's a very important statement Shri Aurobindo makes. There is a necessity and justification of death, not as a denial of life, but as a process of life. But we see that then death is inevitable. It's a process of life. But why the death appears to us terrible and undesirable? This is something which every human being faces. When we hear the word death, it appears terrible and undesirable. Why it is so? Shri Aurobindo says, there is, in the process of death, there is dissolution. There is eating of life by life. And we lose all our freedom. There is compulsion because no one dies voluntarily. There is a compulsion. There is a struggle. There is a pain. We subject ourselves to something that appears to be not ourselves. So these are all the reasons why death appears terrible and undesirable. You feel that there is a sense of being devoured. The devoured is a word Shri Aurobindo uses, which means eating, consuming. We feel by the process of death, we are being devoured and we are broken up and we are destroyed and we are forced away. These are all the things Shri Aurobindo calls it as a sting of death. Shri Aurobindo calls it as the sting of death. That is the sense of being eaten, the sense of being broken up, destroyed, or being forced away in the process of death. This makes us shrink from when we hear the word death. These are all the things which makes the death appear to us terrible and undesirable. And even though we believe that there is life after death, but still this feeling of that feeling of fear still remains. This is about death, Shri Aurobindo says. So death is something, there is a constant, it's a process of renewal of life. It happens because there is something in us which wants an eternal experience, something in us which wants a sense of infinity, because the individual life is divided from its source. As long as individual life is divided from its source, as long as it remains finite, this death becomes inevitable. Secondly, Shri Aurobindo has introduced one more term in this chapter, which is desire. What's the principle behind this desire? Desire means what? We want to possess something. We want to have something. That is a motive behind the desire. Again, the reason behind this movement of desire is that we are all divided beings. There is a division. The oneness is a Sachidananda or Brahman, but in the universe, everything appears divided. The being is infinitely divided. So what happens? What is divided always seeks infinitely to aggregate itself. There is an innate urge among the divided individual units to aggregate itself. So Shri Aurobindo says this material universe is constituted between these two movements, two impulses. One, there is an impulse of infinite division. There is another reason there is an impulse of infinite aggregation. The individual unit, there is an attempt of the individual unit to maintain and to aggrandize itself. It wants to maintain, it wants to aggrandize itself. Is a whole sense of desire, he says, because what is divided, ultimately it has an urge to unite with something. In that process, there is a sense of aggrandizement. It wants to maintain itself, at the same time it wants to aggrandize itself. This is a whole sense of desire, Shri Aurobindo says. This wanting to possess, it can be on the physical plane, it can be on a vital plane, it can be on the moral plane, it can be on the mental plane. So in all planes, there is an impulse to possess more and more, to absorb more and more, to assimilate more and more, to enjoy more and more. So in all these planes, physical, vital, moral, mental, there is a tendency to possess, to absorb, to assimilate, to enjoy more and more. This is a sense of desire. Of course, in the physical form, we feed on the environment. So this is a principle behind the desire, he says. The principle behind the desire is that what is divided, what appears to be divided in this material universe, wants to unite and aggrandize itself. This is the principle behind desire. And this movement of desire, what causes this movement of desire? Till when will it persist? How long this movement will persist? See, Shri Aurobindo says, even though the individual forms in this universe is divided and individualized, there is a secret consciousness is there. It is secretly conscious of its all-embracing and all-possessing infinity. Even though we are all living as finite beings, we are secretly conscious of our all-embracing and all-possessing infinity. There is something infinite behind us. This impulse to realize the secret consciousness, because we are secretly conscious that we are part of the infinity. And there is an impulse in us to realize the secret consciousness. This impulse comes from the cosmic aspect of the divine, Shri Aurobindo says. This is the urge of the cosmic divine. This is what Shri Aurobindo says. Because of that, it seeks to realize first in the terms of life by an increase in growth and expansion, which is inevitable, just and beneficial. There is an impulse to realize the secret consciousness, that is the secret consciousness in us, which wants to possess infinity. This secret consciousness, this urge, this impulse, it seeks to realize it first in terms of life by an increase in growth and expansion. So this process becomes inevitable, just and beneficial. So this is an intermediary moment, but is inevitable. In the physical world, we find there is a feeding upon the environment. By increasing oneself through the absorption of others in their or their possessions. This is how it happens in the physical world. When it comes to the vital part, it becomes a craving of desire, a hunger. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. Hunger in the subconscious vital parts. The moment the mind comes, it becomes a craving of desire in mentalized life. Then at a higher level, it becomes a will in the intellectual life. So, at all levels, physical, vital, mental, higher mental, this desire is a movement which is persisting. This movement of desire is caused by the self-limitation of the individual. This is the main reason Shri Aurobindo says. There is a self-limitation because, as we have seen, we are contained in a finite form. Even though our source is infinite, we are contained in a finite form. Because we are contained, we feel we are limited. There is a self-limitation. But even though we are self-limited, there is a tendency in us to become the master of oneself. That is how this movement of desire happens. And whether the desire is necessary, we can ask whether the desire is really necessary. Shri Aurobindo says desire is a lever and it is an intermediary moment by which desire is at present is a necessary element and it works as a lever, and it is an intermediary moment by which the divine life principle affects its end. Because desire is a dynamic moment. There is something dynamic happening in the process of desire. It can't be dismissed because desire is a dynamic moment and not to be put to an end by inertia. Shri Aurobindo says we should not extinguish it in the interest of inertia. What happens if we do that? Then there is a denial of the divine life principle. One can go beyond because desire is a movement. Ultimately, we have seen desire is a movement which, because it happens because there is an impulse in us to expand ourselves. There is an impulse in us to expand beyond our individuality. So desire serves its purpose for expanding ourselves. If we want to go beyond our individuality, we can go only by expanding our consciousness infinitely. And divine life is possible only by expansion of consciousness. So, desire serves a purpose. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. But at a particular stage, desire is inevitable. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. And where the desire will, the moment of desire will culminate. As of now, the desire is phenomenon concerning an individual unit, a finite unit. The moment it becomes a desire of the infinite, instead of being an individual desire, the desire will go. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. Desire can end only by becoming the desire of the infinite, instead of being the individual desire. Here what happens? At the next stage, the individual gives himself to other individuals and receives back in exchange. So there is a giving and taking. The lower gives itself to the higher and the higher to the lower, fulfilling. There is a fulfillment. The human gives itself to the divine and the divine to the human. And Shri Aurobindo says this law of hunger, the law of hunger means wants to possess. It will eventually give place to the law of love, the law of division to law of unity. This is a necessity and the justification and culmination and self-fulfillment of desire. So desire will fulfill itself in these moments. And desire is a mask, Shri Aurobindo says, assumed by life and is a result of the moment of finite form seeking to affirm its immortality. It's a force. Desire is the impulse of the force of being individualized in life, seeking to affirm itself progressively in succession of time and extension of space. So desire is as of now, desire as of now it belongs to a finite unit. It is a necessary moment because it helps the individual to expand his consciousness. But as a moment, it cannot remain as an individual moment. It will become a moment of the infinite. It will fulfill itself by being, instead of giving, there will be a give and take. There will be a mutual exchange. There will be a mutual gain. So ultimately, desire will result into a higher form. Again, we come to the last aspect of the this third aspect, this incapacity. Why the incapacity? That incapacity is there. We know that the life is outward aspect of the consciousness for Chit Shakti. By its nature, it is omnipotent. It has got all power in it. But it has to work in a limited capacity and partial impotence of a form. The moment the infinite consciousness force assumes a form, it assumes a limited capacity and a partial impotence. Therefore, the life in the individualized form, the life force in an individualized form is also limited and full of incapacity. And there are two factors responsible for this incapacity. Why the life is afflicted with this incapacity? Because of two factors, Shri Aurobindo says. Number one, it has to work against a mass of other surrounding individualized life forces. This we have seen because the individual life not only has to it has to master the other individual life forces. So it has to work against the mass of other surrounding individualized life forces. This is number one. There the incapacity comes. Secondly, it is subject to control and denial by the infinite life itself. Even though it is a part of the infinite life, it is again subject to control and denial by the infinite life itself. Sometimes what happens? The individual life force may not agree with the universal life force in its will and trend. Shri Aurobindo says, secondly, it is subject to the control and denial by the infinite life itself, with whose total will and trend its own will and trend may not immediately agree. Therefore, the limitation of force and the phenomenon of incapacity of individualized and divided life happens. Those incapacity happens because it has to compete with the other individual life forces. Number two, it has to compete with the universal life force of which it is a part. Then this, as we have seen, there is always an impulse of self-enlargement, self-expansion. There is always an impulse in the individual in the individual unit. It is always there, but it doesn't want to limit itself in the present force or capacity. You see, there is an impulse to possess. This impulse to possess is already there, we have seen, because it wants to expand. An individual unit wants to expand itself. That's why there is an impulse to possess. But the force, as we have seen, we are a part of the finite force. Because of that, there is a gap between the impulse to possess and the force. There is a gulf between the impulse to possess and the force of possession, from which the desire arises, he says. The moment the individual rises to a higher level of consciousness, this incapacity goes. But as long as we remain an individual unit, there is always the incapacity, a sense of incapacity will be there. When the individual life force, as the mind is separate from the super mind, or life force is separated from the original source, is consciousness force. Once it becomes one with the individual, that infinite consciousness force, this incapacity also will go. But Shri Aurobindo says this incapacity, as we have seen, this desire is inevitable, death is inevitable, incapacity is also inevitable, he says. Because assuming we have, instead of being a finite force, assuming we have an infinite force, but we are still working with an ignorant mind, but yet have an infinite force, then there will be a chaos in the universe. Supposing, assuming we have an infinite force, infinite capacity, but with an ignorant mind, what will happen is there will be a chaos in the universe. We will work against the divine will itself. That's why he says incapacity is inevitable now. At the present stage, the incapacity for the humanity as of now it is placed, it's unavoidable, he says. All these things, he says, desire, death, desire, and all this incapacity and struggle, everything will be resolved, he says. When it will be resolved means when the life graduates itself, when the mind graduates itself to supermind, when we become one with the force, naturally all these three things will graduate itself, will fulfill themselves, Shri Aurobindo says. Now I'll just take 2 more 3 or 4 minutes. We'll whatever we have discussed now, I would like to present small PPTs. Arun, can you please do it? Yeah, first PPT. Yeah, next. See, this is the basis. This is the basic of life divine. There is a descent of force. Sachidananda is there. There is a descent first happens. The universe is created through the supermind. There is a descent of Sat, descent of Chit, Chit Shakti, and Ananda. Then existence becomes a matter. Then the life, the force, the Chit becomes a mind, the Chit Shakti becomes a life, and then that Ananda aspect becomes a psychic being. Everything happens through the supermind. Sachidananda itself cannot directly manifest in the universe. It has to manifest through the supermind. So ultimately, whatever we find as body, mind, life has its source in the supermind. Next. See, this life, the source of life is Chit Shakti, consciousness force, which is infinite. But it is contained in the individual life forms. It identifies itself with the individual egos, and then it is individualized in individual life forms, which appears as finite life forms, which is again imprisoned in our mind, imprisoned in mind. Mind is ignorant. Because of that, life is also ignorant. Next. There is an exchange of force between the universal life force and the individual life force, which we have discussed. There is always an exchange of life forces between these two things. Next. Death happens when there is a lack of balance. Next. Again, within the individual itself, there is a body and there is a life force. When there is here, the eater eating is himself eaten. That means the body, which is eating, again it is itself being eaten. There is a exchange between body and life force. When the disharmony happens, naturally death sets in. Next. So death is a process of life. Life doesn't end with death. Death is a process of life. This is what Shri Aurobindo says. Next. What is a desire? It is a desire, is an urge to unite by devouring and a movement to be infinite. The impulse behind the desire is an urge to unite, because as of now everything is divided. There is an urge to unite with a source. As a intermediary moment, the desire happens. Ultimately, it is a moment to be infinite. Next. Incapacity. Why incapacity? Because as finite life forms, there is a mutual opposition between individual units. Again, we are subject to control and denial by infinite life. On account of these two things, we feel incapacitated. That's all, no? Anything else is there? Okay. Thank you. And that's all I would like to, thank you. I would like to end my discussion, my presentation now. I just leave it to the forum for any interaction. I'm sorry I've taken much of time. I can't help it.
Wonderful, Sivakumarji. Thank you so much for a beautiful explanation, not only of this chapter, but the context of where it was placed in the life divine. And then the final conclusion with the presentation with images that really has helped to gel all the ideas. And if you hadn't mentioned it, I was going to ask you to explain this sentence of eater eating is himself eaten, but you have done that wonderfully. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure there are questions. I think Pradeepji had raised his hand first, so I will ask him to go. Thank you.
Sivakumarji, I really enjoyed this talk. You have mentioned all the 3 chapters very beautifully.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I have one question, Sivakumarji.
Thank you. Tell me.
Here in these chapters, Aurobindo has not touched upon the role of the ego. Well, elsewhere he has spoken at length, but over here in these three chapters, he has not spoken about the ego, because the sting of death and the desire is a direct result of the ego. So, could you just touch upon it, considering that you have covered all these aspects? Can you touch upon the ego? Because as long as the ego is there, we are involved, attached, wrapped up in our ego, and the
Yeah.
ego is wrapped up in the body. So, the desire also stems from the ego, as Aurobindo said somewhere. Can you just quickly touch upon this?
See, the ego is inevitable because only by the there is a when the consciousness force manifests itself, it identifies, when it manifests itself, it identifies with the individual ego, and then it becomes an individual life form. So the ego, what happens? Ego helps the mass of consciousness to individualize itself. When there is an ascent of consciousness from matter, then next comes the submental forms. Those are plants, then animal forms. Then when it becomes an individual human being, there is a concrete individualization happens. This concrete individualization happens only by identifying that individual form with an ego. But what happens is that the ego, even though it helps to individualize oneself, after some time it becomes unnecessary because it has to go. The moment the life form individualizes itself, and there is a mind, when there is a mind, the mind identifies again with itself with the ego. Up to a certain stage, ego is necessary, and ego is also a part of the movement of desire. After a certain stage, the ego has to go, because the ego forms the false self of ourself. It is not our true self. Our true self is our psychic being, whereas the ego, what happens? Our body, mind, and life identify itself with our ego, not with our true self. That's why ego has to go after some time. Otherwise, we can't realize our true self. Ego at one. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. His famous aphorism is that ego was the helper and ego is the bar now. Ego is necessary. If we don't have an ego, then what happens? Will be a mass of substance. That's all. A mass of colloidal substance without any form, without any concrete individualization. So ego is necessary for up to a particular stage. But after that, after the mind is sufficiently formed, then ego becomes unnecessary, and then ego has to go. Ego is an intermediary phenomenon, inevitable, but it has to go.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? What is it that triggered the development of life out of matter and then mind out of life? Is it the impulse that you were talking about?
See, there is the Shri Aurobindo's Life Divine, or his spiritual teaching, the prominent truth he's portraying is that initially there is a descent. There is a descent of force from above. There is an involution. The Sachidananda, there is involves, and there is an involution of force into the matter. So matter forms the beginning. There is something which is contained in the matter. There is already all the other three principles: life, mind, supermind. Everything is involved in the matter. What is involved? Initially, that first moment is a descent. Second moment is an ascent. In the ascent, whatever is contained within has to come out. So life contained in the matter comes out. Mind is contained in the life which is coming out, and supermind contained in the mind has to come out. This movement is evolutionary movement. There is an evolution of consciousness. What is evolving is a consciousness. The consciousness which is involved will not remain involved. It has to come out. There is an upward movement which is happening. It's just a divine purpose. It serves a divine purpose. What is this moment is a moment of consciousness. That's what we should understand. Am I clear?
Yes, absolutely. So it's inherent, isn't it? It's
inherent. It's inherent.
It's inherent in there. I think somebody else had raised a hand, but I can't see who it was. Whoever it was, please.
Asokan sir, yeah, please.
Hello?
Yes, please do.
Thank you, sir.
Kanji.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity to listen to this elucidation as well as to put a question. Sir, Sivakumar sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, are you hearing me, sir?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, sir. There was a mention that the life force creates forms and it nourishes it. That part is understandable. But the second part, that is the form, it gets nourished by the form itself. That point is not clear, sir. We can elaborate how the life force will get nourishment from the form that it has created.
You see, the form serves as the food for the life force. The life force is something which energizes the form. Okay, this is what the Upanishadic statement says. Eating is himself being eaten. Eater eating, himself being eaten. There is always a mutual exchange of forces between the life force contained within the body and the body. The body is a matter. The matter derives its energy from the life force. The matter is animated. It is kept in motion by the life force contained within. At the same time, the life force is deriving its energy from the body. There is a mutual exchange. As long as this mutual exchange remains in equilibrium, the life goes smoothly. When the moment there is a disharmony, imbalance, then of course all illnesses and diseases sets in. That's what he says. There is a life force, a prana shakti, uses our Annamaya Kosha for its nourishment. At the same time, our Annamaya Kosha gets its energy from our prana shakti, life force. This is, am I clear to you, Asokan sir?
Sir, again, I'm unable to grasp it. That is the one thing that is clear, that life force that creates the forms, so that is the source of nourishment also to sustain. But then, how does it get nourished from the form it has created? The Annamaya Kosha that gets energy from the life force, it is understandable. Andam, Pindam, they say. But then, how the form itself is a source of nourishment to the life force which it has created. It has been created by it.
There is an exchange. There is an exchange happening at a subtle level. See, maybe it may not be. We may not be able to say it biologically or scientifically. We may not be able to see it in its at the gross level. We may not be able to grasp it, but at a subtle level, it happens. There is an exchange of forces between this life force and the body. That is why we see this pranayama and all that. Now, why pranayama? What happens? It helps you to maintain the balance between the body and your life force. Pranayama ultimately, these are all subtle physical exercises. Pranayama and yogas. Pranayama especially, what happens? It tries to maintain the balance between your life force and the body.
Okay.
Pranayama ultimately aims to achieve this balance only. There is a balance between the life force and the body.
Okay.
It happens. We are not able to, scientifically or medically, we are not able to prove.
You've
But
explained
it
it very
happens.
well.
It happens in the subtle level. Yeah.
Okay.
As we have a subtle body, we can't say where is the subtle body. Nobody can say. No, we can't see our subtle body. Likewise, these are all the subtle movements happening within our being. There is a subtle exchange of forces between our life force and the body. The body means physical as well as subtle physical, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you. Thank you.
so it is part of universal exercise then. It is part of
Yes.
universal movement, sir.
It is. Yeah.
So it is a part of universal movement.
Again, it's a part of universal movement, because that universal force, universal life force, which is there in the universe, we also interact with the universal. The individual life force contained within the body interacts with the universal life force. There also this exchange happens. There also the imbalance. When the imbalance happens, when there is a supply of energy to the universal force is more than what we have got in return, there also imbalance happens. Then again, the disease and the death happens. These are all the two reasons Shri Aurobindo says.
Okay.
So
yes, sir.
Can we stop at that point? We can maybe even use this as a topic for a future discussion, because Mother has said a lot about universal forces as well.
Thank you.
I would like Ushaji to ask her question, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, madam.
Yeah. See, what I wanted to ask you was, you said death is not a denial of life. But I'm not even talking about people who deny life by committing suicide, but by those who are fed up with life at some point and they seek some kind of a release in death. So how can we say that death is not a denial of life?
No, that's why we should understand what life is. Life is a force. Life is not something which is happening between birth and death. What we normally understand life is something, a phenomenon between birth and death. That's what he says in one's life. We always say one's life like that. But life is not something which is cabined between birth and death. It is a universal force. Life is an eternal force, exists. No matter the form exists or not, life force always exists. The life sustains itself, renews itself, maintains itself. To do that, death becomes inevitable, because the form at one stage, form has to one form has to give up and the new form has to be created. So life, what do we mean by life? That is where the question lies. Life means not an individual life. We think that the individual life is also there in the matter, life is also there in the plants and animals. It is a force, universal force. Life is a universal force. Okay. But it individualizes itself in individual form, identifying itself with individual ego in the case of human beings. So life wants to sustain itself, continue its journey through successive forms.
Okay. So
For
even
that,
even if an individual is just fed up and wants to have some death by release, it is some other part in him that wants to continue life.
Not continue. That life as a life force will not end up with with X, Y, Z. X, Y, Z are name and form.
Okay.
Right. X, Y, Z is something more such people. See, what we think an individual is our ego, right?
Right.
What supposing when I say I am Sivakumar, I mean my ego only. I'm saying I'm Sivakumar, right?
Right.
But there is a dissolution of form which has identified itself with the individual ego. But the life continues. The life force is there. No
Yes.
matter what, X, Y, Z, life
Yes.
force is there.
Yes.
It's a universal force.
Thank
It
you,
is
sir. No, I
universal.
understand.
It is
Yes, yes.
universal. Universal.
That Nama Rupa is what gets dissolved, right?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you very much.
And one final question from Shilpa, please. Thank you.
Yep. We are not able to hear. Please unmute your mic, please.
Yeah, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. Feels like a very basic question, and perhaps I need to listen to the recording all over again. But when you said it is when the equilibrium is out of balance, that's when all the problems start. So is that then mainly that because we've moved away from our source? I mean, otherwise, again, relating back to this eater eating is himself eaten. I mean, what is this imbalance in the equilibrium that we as an individual can help? I mean, it may be ego and desire and all that, which will make us do that. But how is one to be aware that it's gone out of balance? Is that how are we desiring more than is being supplied to us? I mean, at what stage? I mean, is it just once one has united with the divine, we will know? But then it seems a very, very long way off. So where can we ensure that our demand and supply chain is in equilibrium? I mean, how can we do that as an individual, personal effort?
Yeah. See, Mother has given very practical tips for that. See, we have seen that the source of the problem is that we as divided beings, we are separated from the source. The source is the consciousness force. That is the source. As individual life contained in an individual form, it is separated from its source. So the ultimate solution lies with the unity with the uniting with the source. That will eventually happen, not now, eventually happen as by the evolution of consciousness. Mind will graduate itself to supermind. There unity will happen. Then all these things will be resolved. But till such time, your question, I understand your question, how we can ensure balance between these forces, right? Either with the universal force or within ourselves. Number one, what your mother says is that the more and more we identify ourselves with a psychic being. The psychic being is that part of ourselves which is always identified with the divine, its source, right? It's a part of the it's a divine spark which is within us, which is always identified with its source, that is the infinite. So by more and more identifying ourselves with our psychic being and disengaging ourselves with our egoistic consciousness, with our mind, body, and life, which is associated with the ego, and more identifying ourselves with the ego. More and more identifying ourselves with the psychic being, which is a part of the infinite, which is within us. Of course, we can go. It is a movement from division to unity. This is one way. Even Shri Aurobindo Mother says, the moment you are more and more identifying yourself with a psychic being, your health improves. Mother has stated that. Number two, Mother has given one more way. That is identifying. That is, more and more you be in one with the universal vital force. They say universal vital force. And she has stated one incident also in France, when children, they say, more and more we should try to draw from the universal force. We should be open to the universal force. Mother has stated that children are open to it. That's why children no more, they can play in the sun. They wouldn't feel tired and all that. And she has narrated one incident where in France, people are complaining about the sun. She has stated that you don't feel the sun is your enemy. You treat the sun as your friend. That means more and more you become a part of the universal force, so that you can draw energy from them. These are all the two things. By more and more associating ourselves with a psychic being, Secondly, more and more, we become one with the universal vital force. Universal, we can draw from them. It is quite possible. That's what mother did. Mother told that she didn't get energy by the food alone. She ate very little food, but she drew all her energy from the universal vital force. So we can maintain the balance. It's quite possible.
So this on the material bodily level, but for the imbalance within, how do we know we are not desiring more than what is being supplied to us? Not just for the physical body, but for that inner imbalance. Because we may be desiring or wanting more than in the present state is not being supplied, or that my body is not being ready to receive, but I'm still desiring it in my impulse to move towards perfection, or for the life force and to move towards the new diviner world.
And that is why your mother says we should be able to discern all our movements. See, there are different kinds of movements taking place in us at the physical level, at the vital level, at the mental level. One should be able to discern our movement. We should be able to discern our movement. It should not be impulsive and driven by something else. As long as you are able to discern your movement, whether this will really whether this movement will really take it to my source, that is my true self, or take me away from the source. If you develop that capacity of discernment, naturally, then you will avoid unnecessary movements.
Thank you. That's very clear. Thank you so much.
Shilpa, bite what you can chew.
Yeah.
Bite what you can chew.
Sorry?
Bite
What you can chew.
Thank you. Absolute last question, and that's from Sushma, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shivakumar.
Yeah, please.
And thanks for taking this last. It's more of a comment from what we just said. In the chapter itself, Shri Aurobindo has said that meanwhile, it has to progress from the type of a mutually devouring hunger to the type of a mutual giving, of an increasingly joyous sacrifice of interchange. The individual gives himself to the other individuals and receives them back in exchange. So the lower gives itself to the higher and the higher to the lower, so that they may be fulfilled in each other. The human gives itself to the divine and the divine to the human. So I suppose it's that exchange, or is it that love that Shri Aurobindo is talking about as the more and more that we need to be able to rise ourselves to, from a human love to the divine love? I'm not very clear on that few lines. If you could please explain.
Yes, you see, in the life in its ascent, in its journey, in the initial stages, it's more of a hunger. It's more of ascertaining itself, destroying one form, in order to ascertain or affirm itself that this is a trend, till it becomes an animal, till the level of an animal. The moment the life attains the stage of the mind, and especially the mind, when there is a full development of mind, then what is more important is that we should graduate ourselves to the higher realms. That is, instead of aggrandizing, instead of possessing, there should be more of giving. And the law of association and mutual love will play a greater role when the mind is fully developed. And not only that, when the mind becomes a super mind and everything gets fulfilled. But we are in the stage of the mind where there should be more of a giving, more of love and association. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. He contradicts Darwinian principle. Darwinian principle says at all levels there is a survival of the fittest. from the level of from the level of lower organisms to the higher level. He says, Shri Aurobindo says, it's not so. The moment the mind attains prominence, when it begins to play a key role, then the law of mutual association and love replaces law of competition and strife. The strife will go, struggle will go. Instead, love and association will prevail. So it's a gradual process. It's an evolutionary process. Even among individuals also, a highly developed individual, you will find in him the tendency to love, the tendency to give himself. All these things we find amongst the individuals ourselves, right? Wherever individuals are not that developed, we find the tendency to aggrandize, to become selfish and all that. As we grow in our consciousness, naturally we will develop a tendency to give, to associate, to love. These things will emerge.
Thank you. Is it right to say then, like in Isha Upanishad, very famous lines to say "Tena tyaktena bhunjita" kind of resonates with this?
I'm not able to, that part of Upanishad I'm not aware. So I'm not able to comment on that.
Thank you. It basically, as I understand, it means you give and then you receive in return. It's simple as that.
Okay. Okay. Because in the universe, you're not alone. The simple principle is that in the universe, we think we are alone, but we are not alone. We are part of the universe, and the individual, they are not separate. That's what Shri Aurobindo says. The individual and the universe, they are not separate entities. We are one. Naturally, there's no question of giving. In fact, we are taking. The more you give, the more you receive.